A week of nightmares. It's about 3:30 a.m. I let out a long sigh, reassuring myself that I'm awake. For 5 consecutive nights now, I've been jolted awake at this exact time. But to be honest, I'm not even sure if it's a dream. It feels more like, just before I wake up, an unknown force grips me, violently pulling my soul from my body. In those split seconds, I can sense everything. The beating of my heart, the rush of blood in my arteries, the rise and fall of my chest, the whirring thoughts in my brain. Becoming utterly meaningless, everything comes to a halt. Then I snap open my eyes, and as I crash back onto the bed, I catch a glimpse of a dark shadow fleeting over me. What is this shadow? I'm certain it's not a figment of my imagination, so I've kept it to myself. You're just too stressed out. That's the response I'd expect to get. 3:30 a.m. again. I sigh deeply, affirming my consciousness, awakened by the nightmare once more, struggling to breathe, feeling the helplessness at death's edge. I see the shadow again. But over these days, my fear has given way to a deeper curiosity, and this time I see the shadow more clearly. Normally, shadows are cast by light blocked by an object, but this shadow floating in the air seems different, like a tangible entity, yet still giving off a sense of being an alive shadow. In the instant I wake up, I react immediately, leaping from my bed, trying to grab hold of the shadow. It seems to flee, not just vanishing into thin air. I watch as it moves through the ceiling and disappears into the wall. Living in an apartment, the ceiling is someone else's floor, but who lives above me? I realize I have no idea. 3:30 a.m. yet again. I'd exhale slowly, ensuring I'm awake. Is it a nightmare waking me? I think I hear noises coming from the apartment above. Some lights flicker outside. I get up and walk to the window. An ambulance is parked downstairs. Why at this hour? What happened upstairs? Moments later, paramedics carry someone out on a stretcher, a person or a corpse. That night I don't sleep anymore. Lying in bed, I stare at the ceiling. Gas poisoning, the news says. An elderly woman living alone, dead in her apartment for a whole week before being discovered yesterday. The next morning, I asked the building manager about the incident upstairs. The answer astonishes me. I'm shocked to learn that an old lady lived above me, and she died a week ago, the same day my nightmares began. A week, my nightmares, that dark shadow. Was it the old lady causing my nightmares? Or was the shadow my own nightmare, breaking free from my mind, turning into reality, killing the old woman? I don't want to think about it anymore. Since that day, I've been sleeping deeply. As the days passed, the shadow in my nightmares became a constant presence, a dark specter lurking at the edges of my sleep. Each night as the clock neared 3:30 a.m., a sense of dread would settle over me, a prelude to the inevitable awakening. The shadow wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It felt real, tangible, as if it had a life of its own. Every night it grew bolder, coming closer, its form more defined. It was no longer just a fleeting glimpse. It was a haunting entity that seemed to be reaching out to me. The night after learning about the old lady's death, I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts. The connection between the shadow and the old lady's death was too coincidental to ignore. Was the shadow a manifestation of her spirit, trapped and seeking help? Or was it something more malevolent, a harbinger of death that had claimed her life? I tossed and turned, unable to find peace. The room felt colder, the shadows darker. And then, just as the clock struck 3:30 a.m., I heard it, a faint whisper, a sigh coming from the ceiling above. It sent shivers down my spine. I got out of bed and slowly approached the spot where I had seen the shadow disappear. Standing there, I felt a chill in the air, a sense of something unseen watching me. I reached out, half expecting to touch something, but my hand grasped only air. The next few nights were a blur of sleepless anxiety. The shadow continued to visit me, each encounter leaving me more drained, more terrified. I began to wonder if I was losing my grip on reality. Was I being haunted, or was it all in my head? The answer came on the 7th night. As I lay in bed, waiting for the shadow, I heard the whisper again. But this time, it was clearer, more distinct. It was a voice full of sorrow and longing. It spoke my name, a plea for help that resonated deep within my soul. In that moment, I understood. The shadow was not there to harm me. It was a lost soul, reaching out from beyond, trapped between worlds. The old lady had died alone, her spirit lingering, seeking closure. From that night on, the shadow no longer brought fear. Instead, I felt a sense of compassion, a desire to help. I spoke to the shadow, offering words of comfort, assuring it that it was not forgotten, that its presence was acknowledged. Gradually, the visit ceased and my nightmares faded away. The old lady's spirit had found peace, and so had I. The experience left me with a newfound respect for the mysteries of life and death, a reminder that we are all connected in ways we may never fully understand. Sleep came easier after that, a restful slumber free from the haunting presence of the shadow. The experience became a part of my story, a chapter in my life that taught me about the unseen forces that surround us, the thin veil between the living and the dead. The creeping eyes in the apartment. Ever since I moved into this apartment, my unease has been growing day by day, all because of the tenant across the hallway. Each time I stepped out of my apartment, I could feel a pair of eyes peering at me through a slightly ajar door. At first I flattered myself, thinking maybe I was somehow popular. But those brown eyes lurking in the shadows, they held a malevolent, lecherous gaze that seemed to pierce right through me. So I started leaving my apartment hastily, not daring to look back, yet feeling the intensity of that gaze following me. My name is Alyssa, and I have never felt so afraid. Afraid that one day that person might lose control and come after me. But since they never actually did anything overt, I felt helpless to act. You know that peculiar feeling you get when someone is watching you. I felt it so strongly that it became impossible to ignore. Day by day, it was pushing me to the edge. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront the person behind the door. After all, someone who only dares to stare probably isn't that dangerous, right? So there I was, standing in front of my door, mustering up the courage. As usual, the door across the hallway was slightly open, those detestable eyes rolling about, fixated on me. I shouted, "How long are you going to keep watching me? Do you realize how much you're disturbing me?" There was a flicker of panic, a hint of unease in those eyes, but they continued to stare. "I'll call the police if you keep this up. Your staring is really scaring me." The eyes seemed to grow more agitated. "Do you like me or something? If that's the case, just say it. I don't have a boyfriend. And who knows, maybe I would have considered it if you had the courage to speak up." After hearing this, the once lively eyes started to lose their vigor, dimming as if life was ebbing away from them. Seeing this, I panicked, thinking maybe the person was in some kind of trouble. I rushed over and pushed the door open, only to find a clothing mannequin toppling over. It had been propped against the door, its eyes peeking through the gap. The room was empty. Whose eyes were those then? I slowly turned towards the mannequin lying on the floor. Its expressionless face gradually morphed into a smile as the door gently closed behind me. I stood there, frozen in disbelief. The room, now sealed with the closed door, felt suffocating. My heart raced and a cold sweat broke out. The mannequin's lifeless eyes seemed to mock my fear, its smile growing wider in the dim light. A million thoughts raced through my mind. Was this some sick joke? A twisted setup by someone with a dark sense of humor? Or was there something more sinister at play? The empty room echoed with a silence that was louder than any scream, and the air felt thick with unspoken dread. I backed away, my eyes locked on the mannequin's unsettling grin. Every step I took felt heavier, as if the very atmosphere was trying to keep me there. But I managed to turn around and dash back to my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. Leaning against the door, my breathing was heavy, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I wondered if I should call someone, but who would believe such a bizarre story? A mannequin that smiles, eyes that watch from an empty room. It sounded like a scene straight out of a horror movie, not something you'd expect in real life. For the rest of the night, sleep was a stranger. Every creak of the building, every whisper of the wind seemed like a signal that something was coming for me. I couldn't shake the image of those eyes, the haunting gaze that felt so real, so alive. The next day I made inquiries about the apartment across the hall. The landlord casually mentioned that it had been vacant for months. No one had lived there since the previous tenant, a reclusive artist, had suddenly left town. The revelation sent shivers down my spine. If the apartment was empty, then who or what was watching me? I considered moving out, but something inside me resisted. A part of me needed answers, a closure to the creeping terror that had enveloped my life. So I stayed, but with a wary eye always cast towards that mysterious door across the hallway. The mannequin, the peering eyes, the silent room, they all became a part of my daily life, a haunting melody that played in the background of my existence. I never opened that door again, but the memory of what I saw and felt that night remained with me, a chilling reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. The ghostly shadow in the room. After starting my job, lacking the means to buy a house, I decided to rent an apartment. The apartment was divided into 2 rooms. The outer room served as a living area, and the inner room was my bedroom. Several months passed, and one night I found myself restless, unable to sleep peacefully. I had this nagging feeling that something was about to happen that night, almost as if my sixth sense was kicking in, warning me of a possible break-in. So I locked both the inner and outer doors securely, propped a chair against the door of the living area for extra safety, and even placed a knife under my pillow. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, and eventually I began to feel drowsy. I turned off the light, ready to finally get some sleep. But just then, the room's door silently opened, and a shadowy figure glided in without making a sound. Startled, I instantly became wide awake and reached for the knife, but my body was paralyzed, unable to move or scream. At that moment, I thought, this is it. A burglar must have used some kind of drug. But instead of approaching me with malicious intent, the shadow just stood by my bed staring at me. I couldn't make out its face, but it seemed to be about 1.7 meters tall. In my mind, I slowly gathered my strength, holding my breath, building up energy. After what felt like an eternity, the shadow slowly bent down towards me. When I felt I had gathered enough energy, I let out a loud shout, finally able to make a sound. Startled by my scream, the shadow flew away towards the living area. My strength returned and I leapt out of bed, grabbing the knife and rushing out after it. But to my surprise, once I opened the door, there was nothing. No sign of anyone. The time between the shadow's appearance and my reaction was no more than 3 seconds. How could someone disappear so quickly? A chill ran down my spine as I realized that I might have encountered a ghost. Looking around, I saw that the chair was still in place, and the door was open. The next day, I decided to inquire about my landlord's whereabouts from the neighbors, intending to terminate my lease and claiming that the house had issues. The neighbors told me that before I moved in, a young man had lived there but had committed suicide due to a broken heart just half a month earlier. Learning about the tragedy that had occurred in my apartment before I moved in sent a wave of unease over me. The idea that the previous tenant's spirit might still be lingering in these rooms was both chilling and heart-wrenching. Every corner of the apartment, which I had come to see as my sanctuary in this bustling city, now felt tainted by an invisible presence. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the previous evening replayed in my mind. The silent entrance of the shadow, its mysterious gaze, and the sudden escape when confronted. All seemed too real to be a figment of my imagination. I wondered if the young man's spirit was restless, perhaps unable to move on due to the unresolved pain of his past. I decided to take action the following day. I sought the advice of a local clergyman known for his understanding of the spiritual realm. He suggested that the apartment might need a cleansing ritual to help the departed soul find peace. Though skeptical, I was willing to try anything to restore tranquility to my home. The clergyman arrived with sage and other ceremonial items. He moved through the apartment, chanting prayers and burning sage in every room, especially in the areas where I had seen the shadow. The air soon filled with the pungent aroma of the sage, and a sense of calm started to replace the lingering dread. As the ritual came to an end, the clergyman assured me that the spirit should now be at peace and no longer bound to this place. He advised me to keep a positive atmosphere in the apartment and to remember the young man in my thoughts with compassion and forgiveness. That night I slept more peacefully than I had in weeks. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the apartment seemed to have lifted. In the days that followed, the shadow did not return, and the nights were no longer plagued by fear and unease. The experience left a profound impact on me. It reminded me of the thin veil that separates the living from the departed, and the importance of peace, both in life and beyond. The apartment, once a place of unrest, had become a sanctuary once again, a testament to the power of understanding and compassion. As I settled back into my routine, I often found myself thinking about the young man who had lived here before me. I hoped that wherever he was, he had found the peace that eluded him in life. And in some way, I felt grateful to him. His presence, though unsettling, had opened my eyes to a world beyond my understanding and taught me the value of empathy and kindness.